Welcome to Red Flags and Real Love, hosted by Virginia McConnell, dating and relationship pattern coach, specializing in narcissistic abuse recovery and someone who has lived everything she teaches. This show is about recognizing the patterns that keep us stuck, leaving what's hurting us, and rebuilding into something real. Here's your host, Virginia McConnell.
Welcome to another episode of Red Flags and Real Love. Today, we're going to talk about abuse versus narcissistic abuse. So what is the difference? Not long ago, I was a guest on another podcast and the host asked me a question on the spot. I did not get the questions ahead of time that I've actually been asked in some form more times than I can even count. And that question was, what's the difference between abuse and narcissistic abuse? So I remember pausing for a second before I answered, because it's one of those questions that sounds simple, but actually it gets to the heart of something a lot of people misunderstand. Here's what I said, like more or less. Abuse is abuse, no matter what form it takes, right? So physical, sexual, financial, emotional, psychological, all of it is real. All of it is damaging, and none of it needs to be ranked against the others to count, right? So the difference, what makes it narcissistic abuse specifically, is the intent behind it. Okay. So, and that's basically what I answered. And since I answered that, that has just stuck with me. And I felt it was necessary to talk about it here on Red Flags and Real Love, because I think a lot of people are quietly carrying an experience that they've never quite known how to categorize. Like not sure if it happened to them counts, or not sure if the word abuse applies, or not sure where abuse or narcissistic abuse fits in with all of that. And today I want to slow down and actually unpack that distinction, not because the label matters more than your experience, but because understanding the difference can change how you interpret what happened to you and stop you from minimizing something very, very real. Okay. So I've needed this distinction in my own life more than once, and it took me a long time to actually understand it. Growing up, I didn't have a language for what I was living inside of. As I've talked before, my mother carried real mental illness, diagnosed conditions that shaped a lot of what happened in our home. And for years, I didn't know how to separate them or separate that from something else that was also true, that some of what happened wasn't only mental illness. Some of it was intent, like control, on purpose control, a pattern that served a purpose, even if that purpose was never spoken out loud. And it took me a long time to understand that both of those things could be true at once, right? So that someone can be genuinely unwell, okay, and also engage in patterns that are specifically about control, about maintaining power, about keeping the people around them off balance. And the mental illness explains a lot, but it doesn't automatically explain everything. Okay, so learning to hold both of those truths at the same time. This is hard because of something someone didn't choose. And this is a pattern being used against me, was one of the most important distinctions, right? Like I've ever made in my own healing. So again, like knowing that both truths can be true, both can hold truth. But it is hard because it's not something that someone chose. It's just a pattern. And one of those was the most important distinctions, because if I didn't see that, then I wouldn't know the difference, right? So I didn't erase the compassion that I had for my mom that had mental illness, but it did help me understand that it was not that. And I want to be very, very specific about, mental illness does not cause abuse. It doesn't cause narcissistic abuse. It doesn't cause any of that. So that's very separate, right? But realizing that, it also helped me from minimizing what I had actually lived through. And that's exactly the distinction that I want to walk you through today. So I'm going to kind of get more precise about this, because precision here actually matters for your healing, right? So all abuse counts. I want to be super clear, super clear. All abuse counts. Before we talk about what makes narcissistic abuse specific, I want to be unambiguous about this. So abuse is abuse, regardless of the category: physical, sexual, financial, emotional, psychological. None of these need to be more severe than the other to be valid. Have you ever minimized your own experience because it wasn't physical or it wasn't that bad compared to what other people go through? I want you to hear that your experience doesn't need to be ranked to be real. I had a really hard time understanding that for a long time. And the distinguishing factor is the intent. Okay, so what makes it narcissistic abuse specifically is the intent behind the harm. Narcissistic abuse isn't someone just like having a bad day. It isn't someone who's overwhelmed and snaps in a moment they later regret. It's harm that is used like often repeatedly and often in a recognizable pattern as a tool. So they use it as a tool for control, a tool to keep you off balance, a tool to maintain power in the relationship. And this is not about severity. A single explosive incident isn't automatically narcissistic abuse just because it was intense, and a series of quiet, subtle comments, can absolutely be narcissistic abuse if the underlying intent is control. Okay. So again, I'm going to say this again, a single explosive incident isn't automatically narcissistic abuse just because it was intense. And a series of quiet, subtle comments, okay, quiet and subtle, like things you would not expect, can absolutely be narcissistic abuse if the underlying intent is control. So it's all about intent. And the form doesn't define it. It's the function. The function does, right? So the next part I want to talk about is why they didn't mean it doesn't work. It doesn't hold up. Okay, so one of the most common things I hear from people processing this is some version of, I don't think they meant to hurt me. Okay, and I understand why that thought shows up, and it's often easier to believe that than the alternative, right? Because no one wants to believe that anyone would purposely do things like that to you. But here's what the pattern, like repeated nature of narcissistic abuse reveals. So if harm shows up again and again in similar situations with a similar effect, keeping you smaller, keeping you compliant, keeping you doubting yourself, it's the repetition itself becomes evidence. So it's a pattern. If you keep seeing this, and isolated incidents can be accidents, right? So isolated incidents can be accidents. That's more of abuse, a typical abuse. Over patterns are rarely accidents, right? So patterns are with intentions. This is over and over and over because there's the intent behind it. And that would show up as narcissistic abuse. And why the distinction matters for healing is so important. I cannot stress this enough, because this isn't just an academic distinction. It changes how you heal. So if you believe what happened to you was simply like bad luck or a series of unfortunate incidents, you're left without much of a framework for protecting yourself moving forward. But if you can accurately identify that what you experienced with, see it for what it is, even if that intent wasn't fully conscious on their part, You stop waiting for them to change. You stop blaming yourself for not seeing it sooner, and you start trusting your own perception of what happened. And that's not about assigning blame for the sake of it. It's about giving yourself an accurate map so you can actually navigate your way out and forward into more healthy patterns. Because if you're not seeing it, then it's, how would you know how to fix it, right? How would you know how to move forward and choose differently? If you've been sitting with your own version of, was this really abuse or was this something else? Here's what I want you to take from this. So you don't need permission to call your experience what it was. You don't need a perfect textbook match. You don't need someone else's diagnosis or lack of one to validate what you lived through. Abuse is abuse in every form. And when intent is present, when harm becomes a pattern used to control rather than an isolated moment of being human, just a one-off, we had a bad day, bad, incident, that's worth naming very clearly for your own sake. So once you recognize it, name it. Absolutely name it. And that is absolutely the only way to heal and move forward. So if this episode helped you put language to something you've been carrying, I would encourage you to take my free quiz at breakthepatterns.netlify.app, or really just check out breakthepatterns.net. It can help you get a clarity on where you're at right now. And if you want to go deeper, my course was that narcissistic abuse. It walks you through all of this in more depth. So I give you real tools for validating your own experience. And yeah, I've got the free Monday class, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, every Monday. So thank you so much for being here. And we'll see you next time on Red Flags and Real Love.
That's it for this episode of Red Flags and Real Love. If anything Virginia talked about today resonated with you, visit breakthepatterns.net and join the free class every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's free, it's live, and it's the best place to start. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a quick rating wherever you're listening. It takes 30 seconds, and it genuinely helps the show reach more people who need it. See you then.